Welcome to the Corporate Venturing Insider series. Today we're in Montreal at the GCV event where many CVCs are meeting. But it is my true honor today to have Nancy Pfund, founding and managing partner at DBL Partners. Nancy, welcome.
Well, thank you, Nicolas. It's wonderful to be here in Monterey. We all love Monterey, in June especially. And special thanks to GCV for inviting us and for hosting this truly important group.
So Nancy, do you mind spending maybe 5-10 minutes describing your personal journey into corporate venturing and also financial VCs?
Absolutely. Well, it's the least linear path that you'll hear, I think. A very circuitous path for me to find my passion and work, which is impact investing. Because when I look back at how did I get here, I didn't even know what venture capital was when I was in college. So it wasn't like I spent my teenage and early adult years dreaming of being
and
a
planning.
Yeah, dreaming of being a VC. So that we sort of check off that option. What I think when I look back, I was very influenced by my parents, which is not surprising.
Yep.
My father was a patent attorney and an engineer and an inventor, and he would always invent little gadgets that our family needed. Like when our car got stolen, he invented an anti-theft device before cars had those.
My father did that.
You're kidding?
Yes.
Well, see, we're at the same table for a reason here.
Yep.
And so I have 4 sisters, no brothers, so there was no like gender stereotyping as to what we did in our family. I would make pies with my mother and solder wires with my father on these gadgets he would
nice.
create. And so he was a strong influence to me, obviously, in innovation and technology. Whereas my mother, very involved in community and local politics. You know, she dragged me from door to door when she was campaigning for a school board chief or some office that she was passionate about. And so that to me was just normal, is to have these kind of two things going on at the same time in our family, along with all of the other craziness of having 5 girls and no brothers. So when I look back, what that did is it opened my mind to the importance of both of those activities. And so my career up until when we started the first fund really was a moving back and forth, a toggling, if you will, between innovation and society. Sort of what my father represented and what my mother represented.
Innovation and impact.
Yeah, not to get too Freudian or anything, but I mean, I really do think that those were the 2 pillars of my upbringing in terms of kind of how to channel a career. And so what happened is as an undergraduate, I chose anthropology, which of course my parents were like, how are you going to get a job in that? What is anthropology? Many people still ask. But I continue to believe that it is a really good training for what we do. Which
is a study of human behaviors.
Yeah, human behavior. How do you get consensus? How do you bring people into a cultural fit and not just a day-to-day existence? What are the norms? How do you exist outside of the norms, and what are the consequences? All of that is really fodder for what we go through every day. And so some people like to joke about sort of being an anthro major, but I really do, I'm not forcing anyone to take that path, but if you're interested in it, it can lead to all kinds of very interesting career options. And so what I had done is I studied the conflict between lay people and scientific experts in various innovations in our history as my master's thesis. So I didn't go to Papua New Guinea or any place like that to study the population there.
Local.
I studied our own experts, elites and lay people, and I just loved it. And so from there, kind of worked at Stanford Medical School, looking at innovation in medicine and how should the public be involved in deciding what priorities our society has. Very relevant coming through the pandemic in terms of what are the choices that society makes. And then I decided I kind of had a path. Should I go for a PhD and sort of be a professor, or study these issues even more, or did I want to be hands-on? And I decided I wanted to be hands-on. I wasn't quite ready for the traditional business school yet because, I just had so many more influences from academia. I had also worked at the Sierra Club, so I was kind of a nonprofit type of person at that time. But I knew that innovation lived in a lot of corporate R&D, and innovation was a fuel for entrepreneurship, even though it was inchoate at that point in terms of my understanding. So I decided to go to the Yale School of Management, which really blended the traditional business school curriculum with a broader sort of societal lens. And so it felt good to me to sort of blend that, and definitely benefited from the learning of skills in the corporate world, and the having friends that were at consulting firms or banks or whatever. So when I came back to California, there was a recession. It was a little hard to get a job. I was going to work for the governor of California at the time, who was Jerry Brown, his first time around, because he had a technology office, Science and Society, called Office of Appropriate Technology, which
Appropriate Technology.
Yeah, he was so far ahead on that one, and it was a great group of people. As a consultant, I studied biotechnology and its impact on California. This is way back when no one knew what biotechnology was.
Very forward.
Yeah, it was a very fun project that revealed a lot about how these technologies would affect our state. But what happened is, when he finished his term, the new governor that came in didn't really like this office. He abolished it like the second day he was on the job. So of course I was out of a job, having just graduated from business school, in a recession. So that was a little bit of taking the wind out of my sails. But I found a job at Intel, where I worked on new product marketing. They were just beginning to realize that what Intel had was going to be of use to everybody, and that they had to communicate that utility to non-engineers. And so, me being the token anthro major at Intel, I was able to help them make that transition. I also had the privilege and luck of working with Bob Noyce, who was one of the founders of Intel.
I did not know that.
Yeah, I mean, just an incredibly inspiring person, and such a friendly, talented guy. So he was one of the first to see that the semiconductor industry was going to be global, was going to run into competitive wars with other countries. At the time, Japan was really exerting its strength in semiconductors, and the Valley was still sort of apolitical, and just didn't think that government had anything to do with what the chip companies and the electronics companies were all about. And so Bob was one of the first to see, we need to kind of organize and invest in our future and get our government to support what this revolution is all about. And so there was no government affairs person, there was no Intel Capital back then, but I kind of helped him build that. And then by the time I left, they hired their first government affairs kind of policy person, which
wow.
was
Okay,
fun.
this is really good.
Yeah, and so you were wondering, so why would you leave Intel if you were getting to work with Bob Noyce?
Yes.
It's a good question. I was actually, I got engaged, and my husband lived up in the East Bay, and I worked down in Santa Clara. And he is a physician, is a physician, and so he really couldn't move. And so I didn't want to commute from Santa Clara to Berkeley, where we still live. And so I thought, well, I need to find a job in the city. I mean, I love Intel, but I can't bear, even back then, the commute was terrible. So back then there were no tech companies in San Francisco. This is in the 80s. Yep. And so I had heard of this company called Hambrecht and Quist. I was very active in a lot of democratic politics. The founder of Hambrecht and Quist Bill Hambrecht was very known to be, he had been in college with Bill Bradley, or I mean, the basketball player turned senator. I mean, he was just sort of a known entity then, and so I got a job there, and basically H&Q, as it became known as, was one of the first companies to both invest as a venture capitalist in the tech companies that were coming out of the Valley, and also the investment bank that took them public, Apple, Genentech, Netscape. Before the whole Valley was of interest to Wall Street, there were these local investment banks, and so H&Q was one of those.
And your role was?
I was a securities analyst. That was how I started. And I didn't know what that was either. And I certainly didn't know that when you were a securities analyst working in San Francisco, you were supposed to get up at,
Yeah, for the East Coast.
For the East Coast. You were supposed to have East Coast hours. And had I known that, I probably wouldn't have gone there. But it's good I didn't know, because it turned out to be a place I didn't leave for decades. It was a fantastic place to work. And the same thing that had happened at Intel happened at H&Q. But in a slightly different way. The Valley was getting more aware of the role of policy, the impact of securities lawsuits, and the need to shore up education. And so TechNet was formed, in that 90s period. And I was the one that kind of helped our company be one of the founders. And that was John Doerr and Cisco. I mean, there was a whole generation of Silicon Valley leaders that felt let's give our industry a voice in civic society and in the capitals of our country and states around the country. And since no one else really was interested in that at H&Q except me and Bill Hambrecht, but he was too busy. I got that job in addition to being a securities analyst, and eventually I switched over to the venture capital division. And so I finally landed in the functional category that I operate in today, without the impact lens, but just being able to really get at innovation and look at the factors that make entrepreneurs successful and don't. And then what happened is that Bill Hambrecht, who had been, I think he was on the board of the Sierra Club or the Sierra Club Foundation, way back in 1990, he said, why don't we raise an environmental fund? Because I had been at the Sierra Club, he was interested. And so we raised a tiny fund. It was 17 million.
Okay. Which at the time was not that small.
Well, yeah, I mean, it wasn't that small. Today it's like, why did you even bother? That's like teeny. And we had some corporate investors, which was fascinating. But it was too early. It was there wasn't the regulatory map and enforcement for toxic waste, and the dominant narrative at that time was all about Superfund sites, which is kind of hard to make a business around those. But we persevered, and we had some great investments in that fund. We veered towards scientific instrumentation. We were the first investors in Odwalla, the original fresh juice company, because a big premise of that company was that when people started to enjoy fresh juice, they would care more about what's in it, and they would not want it to be laden with pesticide residues.
And they can't go back.
Yeah.
Yep.
So it was like, it seems so old school now, but back then it was quite a revolutionary development in sort of premium beverage. So that we did for a while, and then of course the whole .com boom happened, and so we all kind of dropped everything and went to invest in that cycle, and just loved the process. We went public as a company, and then we were acquired by by Chase, and then Chase bought JP Morgan a few years later, and that's how I ended up at JP Morgan, was through that series of acquisitions. And since our venture group had been very tight and very focused in Northern California, when we became part of a big national bank, it was no shocker here. It was not what we were used to. It was difficult to think that now we were reporting to an entity in New York City. And so it was a time where a little bit of a crisis opens up your eyes to, well, gee, maybe I should do something new. And so I had heard about this new fund that the Bay Area Council, one of our leading regional government organizations, they had spawned this idea to raise some funds that would address the growing haves and have-nots in the Bay Area. And this is in the 2002 timeframe, where the benefits of entrepreneurship were really concentrated in certain neighborhoods and and others were being left behind. And so we had been very active members. That was part of my remit on my kind of policy hat part of my job. And so when they did this, they said, would you guys like to raise the fund and manage it with us? And so many iterations later, because what their view was, we didn't think was quite investable, but we came to an agreement of how to structure such a fund. And my boss, the head of H&Q at the time, said, Nancy, this is a no-brainer. I mean, you love policy, you love community engagement, and you love innovation and investing. And instead of 2 jobs, you'll have 1 job where you marry those 2. So that's how our first impact fund came to be.
The true calling.
Yeah, exactly.
And then DBL Partners.
Yes, so that was so our first fund was 2004. We really scraped our way into existence in terms of how difficult, how many bruises we got, because it was unusual, and the dot-com bust now had made people that used to like venture capital run away from it. Because, so
scared and scarred.
Scared and scarred, good way to put it. Plus, they're like, wait, what? This is some do-gooder venture capital fund? You care about society? That was anathema for a lot of folks back
You heard that?
Yeah, oh yeah.
Oh wow.
I know, it's so weird to think that in 15 or 20 years we've gone from, I hate that idea, it's heretical, to, I love that idea, and if you don't do it, I'm not going to invest in you.
This is real progress.
Yeah, I mean, it is a source of motivation and inspiration to see how the world has changed. But certainly back then, it was hard. It was, to get to 75 million, which was our first fund size, was a struggle. But we did it. We started making investments. And then what happened, and they were still somewhat embryonic. I mean, Tesla, think about Tesla in 2007. That not a huge story there that JP Morgan, senior bankers would think was that interesting. Took a few more years than that. So anyway, when Jamie Dimon became the CEO of JP Morgan, he looked at all of these little funds, because we were just one of many that had accumulated through the various acquisitions that JP Morgan represented. He said, I want to spin those out. If we're going to do private equity investing, I want it to be done with the bank's money and with our staff, JP Morgan partners, whatever. And so that was the decision. And I have to say that at the time, I loved investing in entrepreneurs. I did not view myself as an entrepreneur. I was like, wait, I worked at H&Q and then JP Morgan for over 20 years. I'm not your likely candidate to start my own company. But sometimes getting pushed out of your comfort zone is what gets you to the next level, even though you may not agree with it at the time. And so it was kind of like, well, we don't really have a choice. Let's do this. And so we spun out in January of 2008. Which little did we know what a terrible year that would be to start your own, hang your own shingle. Because, of course, as we wanted to raise our second fund, because we did have some progress in the portfolio, and the word impact investing was now at least something that a few people knew about, and so there was the rumblings of a new investment approach that we represented. And so we wanted to take advantage of that. But then September of 2008, the whole world collapsed. Our portfolio went through mega problems, including Solar City and Pandora and Tesla, you know, as everyone did. You know, we had to drop everything, take care of our companies, live to fight a better day, and get to a point where we could raise a fund. And so instead of raising the fund in 2009, we raised it in 2010. But the bad news is we had one heck of a first year as an independent company. The good news is that by the time we came out of it, Tesla went public in 2010. We had Pandora, we had Solar City, we had, just a lot of positive developments in the portfolio, and were able to really become a spokesperson for this new fledgling field of impact investing, because we had real world stories, we were making money for our investors, and we were making a difference in terms of our social and environmental impact. And so from there, it's just been expanding. We partner with Ira Ehrenpreis from the Technology Partners practice, and for our we joined forces. Ira and I had worked together for ages. We had been in Tesla together, and we looked at each other and said, well, I'm going to raise my next fund, I'm going to raise my next fund. Why don't we join forces? And so that's when DBL Partners was created, and we brought in his group and his leadership. And we raised our third fund in 2015. And then during COVID, we raised Fund 4. And the journey from Fund 1 to Fund 4, oversubscribed for the past two funds. People clamoring to know more about what is impact investing, our ability to tell the story, to show people how you measure your success, how you make a difference, as well as make returns. That all has been extremely sought after, and so it is a story of the vision, the commitment early on, getting through those early challenges, and then waking up to a world that is much more receptive to what you're doing, and helping build that, and bringing in not just the entrepreneurs and the financial LPs, but corporates as well, as they saw this opportunity to reinvent their future and join in a sustainability impact practice.
It's amazing to see the progress in just 15 years. We're not talking 50 years.
Yeah, it's...
Wow.
And the funny thing is, we didn't really realize it at first. We were so busy just taking care of the portfolio, or raising our funds, or moving our offices, that we didn't have that much time to study or to reflect. And then, of course, we just got swept up into this movement. The various conferences, and we're very dedicated to writing about issues that we think are both investable and important to society, and so getting into the kind of intellectual center of this field. It's just it's been one heck of a ride.
But you did feel responsibilities too very early on, that you had to prove the impact investing model worked.
It is such a weight on your shoulders to be first, and to to be early. You don't have to be first, but just to know that everything is, the people that want to work in this field won't be able to work in the field if you fail, because they'll point to, well, Nancy said she could do that and they didn't do it. And yet it's so important. It's too big to fail.
Too big to fail, in a positive way.
Yeah. And so that has weighed on us from the beginning. And it's a privilege, really, because it does give you the strength, the dedication, the commitment to know that you're part of a historic process, as opposed to just doing a job. It's more of a calling, it's a commitment, and it's an affirmation of what we can be as a society.
Very nice. So I'll go back to your personal story, and I'm going to ask a question I've not asked anyone before, because I have 4 siblings. So I have 3 sisters and a brother. Oh. How much of so many siblings do you think shaped who you are as an investor?
Well, hopefully my sisters don't watch this, but I think it shapes you, because what order are you in?
I'm the oldest.
Oh, you're the oldest. Okay.
Yes. Yes. Me, a sister, a brother, and 10 years younger twin sisters.
Oh, that's fascinating.
Yes.
All kinds of opportunity for different...
Which we can discuss outside the
yeah,
interview.
exactly. We'll do that after the show. I would say that, so I'm number 4 of 5, and I think, well, so 2 things. What I mentioned earlier, we had no gender stereotyping.
Yep.
So all chores were for all of us. No dividing of labor, which turned out to be a good thing because it makes you just, doesn't pattern your behavior, doesn't make you intimidated by doing one versus the other. So that was all good. What was a little more challenging was being number 4 out of 5. So the first 3 were more close in age, and then I was closer to my younger sister. And so I was always like, do I try to get in with the older 3, or do I become the boss of my younger sister? And in some ways, that is a balancing act that you have different players, you have different circumstances, but it does give you some EQ in terms of how am I going to get this decision made, or how am I going to get this product launched. I mean, there are just ways that you understand your power, your agency, and
more nuance.
And then when you don't have that too. So I think there's a justification for any birth order, really. But I have noticed in my own life that wearing those 2 hats is something that repeats itself. Sort of being part of the dominant group and then being the underdog.
Very nice. And let's talk about financial discipline, because clearly you started without the impact really about financial investment. How much of that financial discipline you took from early on and you still apply today, and what have you actually developed with your own footprint?
Well, we like to say at DBL that we benefit from having that purely financially driven history and experience and network and knowledge of kind of the way that our industry is structured. And so we have a slide about this. It's a Venn diagram where we're part of the traditional venture capital industry is one circle, and then the other circle is the impact investing industry, which is brand new, very, very capable of going many directions at the same time, and full of people that are new at this investing game. And so, which is fabulous. I mean, what an opportunity to be at the beginning of a new field and to help create it. But we feel that intersection that we represent is important because that financial discipline, which you refer to, we honed that. I mean, we saw enough deals go bad. We saw enough, rounds going wrong, and companies suffering during good times and bad to understand that there are serious consequences when you get this wrong. And while, of course, no one has 100% perfect average, we are able to use that experience to create a discipline that not every fascinating company that you think is going to change the world is actually either going to make it, or maybe they'll even make it, but it won't turn into a good investment because maybe your terms were wrong, or things went awry and you got wiped out in a pay-to-play round, or whatever the bad things that can happen. We've been there, done that, seen it, and so we're able to use some of that knowledge and discipline to help prevent some of those mistakes going forward.
I think knowing the terms is so important, and I've seen, and probably I'm victim of my own naivety, where sometimes I don't realize how bad a term could be, and sometimes it's a pay-to-play, sometimes it's warrants. How would you recommend our audience to really watch out for terms? What's the best way to learn about the consequence of the terms that may not look like much, but can be very severe. You went through them in terms of the painful consequence of them, but how do you learn about them? What would be the best way to learn?
Well, I think it's have a drink with people like us that can tell you, what really happened in a deal that went awry. I mean, sometimes you're on the right side of warrants. I mean, in Tesla, there was a round there where we couldn't get anyone to invest, and so insiders were rewarded with warrant coverage. Not anything atypical, but it was a necessity to get people to invest. And of course, at the time, we're all like, oh my gosh, is this going to work? And then, of course, it worked in a very convincing way.
It was appropriate to the level of risk.
Exactly. Yeah. So, that's, one half of you tells that story, don't be afraid. Sometimes if all else fails, these are some mechanisms that can work if you still believe in the company. On the other hand, there's the other half of you that says, you know what, we just got crammed down in terms of our ownership because it was so hard to get financing, that the terms people got, lots of warrant coverage, or there was a pay to play. These are the tools that are used to keep an investment alive. And if you don't have the cash to play, or at that point the belief, that's how you're going to get a negative outcome. And so it's important to provide both sides so that you don't scare people into thinking that this is around every corner, but also to understand that you can use these to your advantage in certain circumstances.
Very nice. Now I want to double click on the anthropology. And here, the study of human behaviors, venture capital is a white glove industry, and it's about the entrepreneurs, and it's about their projects selling to others. How much is it useful for when you look at the project and what the project is meant to do, and the likelihood of this project being successful and being adopted?
Well, of course, if we knew the answer to that in a foolproof way,
scientific way,
the world would be a better place. But anyway, so you do the best you can. But what I will say is that lens of looking at the context around an entrepreneur, around a product, around a social fabric that has certain unspoken and written laws, that's what an anthropologist does. It kind of looks what's going on behind the scenes and is important, but maybe not visible. Like, are there rules against this, that, and the other? Or is this kind of behavior particularly well rewarded in this society? And so none of that is obvious until you start to deconstruct, a culture and look at it as a kind of living organism. And so those are the very questions that you ask, maybe with different words in an investment. It's kind of like, is there competitive differentiation? Are there incumbents that are going to be fighting this, and do they have the ability to fight it, or will we break through? Are there special classes of technology here that will allow you to thrive in ways that other companies with lesser sacred technologies, if you will, won't? So, it's just different. It's using different words, but it's the same focus on, it's not just a product, it's not just a person. Those are necessary but not sufficient. It's the way that this innovation is going to be introduced into the world, and the success of that will be determined in large part by the interaction of the various forces.
In a way, it nearly feels like we should be thinking as first principles, but this helps you to identify maybe more first principles, trying to open the black box and understand the interconnections. What could be the insights you need for building what you said is not obvious? And maybe this is my next question, and I'm sure many CVCs wants to know, is how do you build a contrarian view? How do you validate or invalidate it?
Yeah, so this goes back to your question about my birth order. And remember, I said I was partly part of the powerful three, and then I was part of the underdog. And I think that an underdog is kind of the other side of the coin of a contrarian. Because if you feel that you're going up against incumbents or the traditional way of doing things, which is very much what an entrepreneur does, not for its own sake, but to build a better product or to build a better world, whatever it is you're trying to do. You're not just, you're doing it for a reason. You are bound to have contrarian moments. And so I sometimes feel that the word contrarian has unfortunately a little bit of a stigma about it, that you're like negative.
Oh, really?
It really isn't negative to me. It's liberating.
Yes.
Because you're able to put aside the conventional wisdom and see toward a future where that wisdom no longer matters.
Yeah, it gives you a license to think freely.
Yeah. But it depends on your social setting, I guess. Sometimes, oh, that person, he's always like a contrarian.
Like the black duck.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. But I think it's liberating. I think it drives innovation. And so for a corporate venture person, perhaps it's a little bit of a fish out of water in a corporate setting where there are rules and there's there's a predictability to how you succeed in a corporate setting. But I don't think that should get in the way, because by now corporate venturing is known to be one of the tools you use to not assume you know what the future is and to go after it. So I do think that giving the license to VCs, be they in financially oriented firms, impact firms, or in corporations, is the way we get around the stigma associated with pipe dreams and dreams that are larger than what we see today, and turn them into the next generation of business. And so it's not your typical annual plan. It's a plan for a future that goes far beyond the people in the seats at the time.
Future to be.
Yeah.
So today we had the Global Corporate Venturing event. I know you work with CVCs. I know you find a lot of value from the CVCs. Can you maybe give a few tips about how CVCs could be even more impactful to entrepreneurs, maybe working with you and other financial VCs?
Well, the experience is largely positive. I would say that in the early days, some of the traditions were not as articulated. And so, I'll give you an example of what not to do is invest in a company with us and then, for various reasons, 6 to 12 months later, invest in a direct competitor.
Oh my gosh.
Which we have had happen several times. And maybe it's because someone left that job and someone else is put in, or there's a new corporate directive, or someone met this person.
Well, it's no excuse.
Yeah. Oh, well, you said it. But yeah, I mean, it's bad. And so, but I think most people know that now.
Yep.
I mean, I haven't seen it happen as frequently as maybe 5 years ago. So that's good news. In terms of what you could do on a proactive scale, I would say, we talked a bit about it on stage, I think going after the bolder, earlier investments. And I know that makes people uncomfortable because they want to see a path to this being part of their product portfolio within a certain period, or just lots of strategic benefits. But the reason I say that is just because there's such an availability of capital now, and a corporation is able, if you jump in early, to really differentiate from other investors by helping, being a customer, or helping to find customers, or developing a business development relationship, allowing the entrepreneurs to go into the lab of your colleagues at your company and just learn and interact. I mean, it's such a rich opportunity set that I feel in some ways it's to just focus it on later stage companies is to miss some of the opportunity. And so go in early, and they're not all going to work, and but you're going to learn something even so. And some of them will turn out to be the company, the sector-defining new entrants, which is, of course, a huge win for everybody.
I like to think about it as building the intimacy with the future success stories.
Yeah.
And when I proposed TDK Ventures to my top management, I said, imagine if we had invested in Tesla 10 years ago and would have built intimacy and understood the change to electric vehicles. At that point, everyone was like, oh yeah, of course we would have invested in Tesla. I said, no, 10 years ago, that was not obvious. And the point was, but it would not have been obvious 10 years ago, it would be a success. Many people said it would not work, but we would have built intimacy, we would have learned early. And so maybe, can you talk about the value of this intimacy with the entrepreneurs, walking the journey with them and learning so much about what they are doing that then educates you on other innovation that could happen?
Well, absolutely, and I do think that the Tesla example back in that 2009 period, when Daimler did invest in the company, is a great example of what you're saying, because I'll never forget, we had the smart car that Mercedes was then developing in Europe. We had one and we turned it electric, and the Daimler people came to visit. And they just thought that was incredibly cool, and it was just sort of a fun thing to do.
And that was before they invested?
Yeah.
Well, that's cool.
No, that kind of started to develop some of the relationship, and then it, of course, blossomed from then. And of course, we all knew that eventually these two companies would be competitors, but that, it was far enough in the future. And the Daimler folks recognized that there was a lot of technology here that wasn't resident in their, very respectable, vaunted car works, and that they, in terms of the responsibility as a leader in this field, they had an obligation to really open the lens and see if this was going to go anywhere. So I think that's, that I talk about bold, I talk about early, and that obviously worked very well. And now, of course, we're seeing the whole industry shift. But I can certainly tell you, Daimler was not the only door we knocked on. I mean, there were a lot of, we needed money, and we knocked on a lot of doors, and did not get, even a crack open.
So let me double click then on Daimler versus the others. What made Daimler decide to make the investment? What do you think tilted them from being like everyone else saying no to a yes?
I don't know the answer
Oh.
to that. I mean, I have my own theories. I mean, I think part of it was that they rolled up their sleeves and, they saw this smart car. They came to the facility. They, the technology of it, they respected, and they were, they were able to grasp its significance. I don't know whether the German, at the time, the solar industry was really booming in Germany, so the whole idea of another source of power perhaps was more widespread in Germany than it was here. Certainly the fact that the US government was considering including the electric vehicles companies, at the time Tesla, in the bailout funds, which of course Tesla famously paid back years earlier. But
Yes.
There was, that didn't just go to the incumbents in Detroit. It went to this new company, and so the fact that they had vetted the investment. I mean, I think there's always sort of strength in numbers,
Yep.
but I can't tell you what the definitive.
Okay.
I would love to know.
We should be asking them. Yeah. So you're a legend in clean tech investments. So I have to ask about clean tech. And we had clean tech 1.0, which many people said it was bad, but actually if you waited long enough, it became very good. Mm-hmm. Now we are in clean tech 2.0. What would be your advice to investors that really want to move the needle to invest in clean tech, especially as the market starts to be uncertain right now, but taking a long-term view maybe?
Well, I would say that if there's anything we've learned over the past 2 years, that resilience is not a nice to have. We need a more resilient society, more resilient planet, natural systems. I mean, everything, energy systems. And we've seen the consequences of not being resilient. And so I think that in terms of the difference between then and now, unfortunately, the consequences of climate change are in front of us on a daily basis, whether it's the air we breathe, our neighbors, forests burning, extreme weather, hurricanes. I mean, the whole litany we have now on the nightly news is...
We move to the obvious.
Yeah, and so now it's not a theoretical our grandchildren's problem. It's our problem, and so that it always makes it easier for people to act. And what I would say is that the blossoming of alternative of renewables and storage, wind, solar, various kinds of energy storage, improvements in the grid, that is now going mainstream. Even in Texas, where they had that, the problem last year, renewable resources have been helping them this year deal with some of the extremes in temperature. So it's not a blue state, red state thing. It's everyone realizes. Humans. Yeah, it's cheaper, it's better, and certainly the next generation, it's table stakes. I mean, we have to do that. And so I think even the conflict, the war, the tragic war in the Ukraine has also been a catalyst. And as I mentioned on stage, there are whole regions of our world that depend on, historically, Russian natural gas. Well, that's a non-starter for a lot of people. It's not going to happen overnight, but you are going to see in Europe much more energy independence, and that means more relying more on clean, renewable, distributed resources.
It's a good wake-up call to accelerating this green energy.
Yeah. Well, and I mentioned that our coffee company on stage, when we talked a few minutes ago.
This was a really good example.
And it's one of those that totally came out of the blue. We were like, what?
And if you are drinking coffee now, listen.
Right. You're going to feel guilty, but I have a way out. So we have a company called Bellwether Coffee in Berkeley, and it makes a distributed small electric roaster that you can put in the cafe, as opposed to what they do now, which is they have a hub and spoke. The industry has a hub and spoke, centralized, big natural gas consuming roaster, and then you drive the coffee beans to and from. And so what that means, sadly, is that your morning cup of coffee is a cup of carbon. And so you're contributing, and there are 400 million cups of coffee consumed per day in the US alone. So this is not some tangential, non-important.
It's massive.
Yeah, and people love their coffee. It's not like people are going to give up coffee. It's like, would you give up your car? Of course not. Yep. So passionate about coffee. Well, enter an electric roaster that is ventless, it doesn't have the emissions, doesn't depend on natural gas, and it's cheaper. It also avoids some of the transportation of beans. So this company, Bellwether, is dramatically reducing the carbon footprint of coffee. At the same time, and this is a big premise of ours, there has to be no sacrifice.
Yes.
The coffee is better because freshly roasted, expertly roasted coffee just tastes so much better than something that was roasted, a month ago.
Same for grinding fresh, and yes.
Yeah, I mean, we've all experienced that growing sophistication around what good coffee means from when we were kids to now. So this is just part of that trend. And so what's not to like? It's better coffee, it's cheaper for the cafes, and it's lower carbon. Well, it's during the pandemic, of course, people didn't go to cafes, so we didn't have many sales. And so we said, okay, well, since no one's going to cafes, let's develop our Generation 2 roaster that is quieter, has many more great features on it, software features, cheaper, fewer parts, the whole, version 2. So we did that, and we have this amazing roaster now, and now the world is coming back. But what happened that is just so telling of how interconnected our world is and how all events eventually come down to the boardroom table. The first day of the war, we happened to be at the company in Berkeley because there was a regulatory person that we wanted to introduce to the company to show how you could roast coffee without natural gas. Because that's a big movement in the West, is to build cities for the future.
Yes.
by dramatically restricting the amount of natural gas hookups you can have. So we were just there, and the company had redesigned its website, and so to make it kind of as nice as version 2 of the roaster. So what happened is that all of a sudden we get all these inquiries on this first day of the war from cafes in Germany. And we're like this tiny little company. We're not internationally focused. We're like, just getting through our early years. And we're like, why are all these cafes in Germany pinging us today? Mm-hmm. And it turned out, which is obvious once you say it, that on that first day of the war, they realized their supply of natural gas may be limited because Russia may not send the gas. And therefore, how would they roast their coffee beans? So they were just looking on the internet. How can I roast my coffee beans without using this natural gas fired plant? And so we were just like, wow, we're part of this, tragic conflict. But on the other hand, it's a kick in the pants to get us off of natural gas in every industry we possibly can, and including our favorite products. And so what we call this is the electrification of everything.
Yes.
We will see increasingly the decarbonization through electrification in many, many fields.
I really like the electrification of everything. Now, clearly with Cleantech 2.0, we're still not on the green electricity. And I nearly feel like maybe it's too early to call Cleantech 3.0, but there are many initiatives that are pure green. And how do you see the transition from better, clearly energy than before, moving to a really nice and green energy in the future, especially as an investor?
Yeah, well, it's fraught. I mean, there are reasons why energy has remained, why your grandfather would recognize an electric grid, because it's the same as he had when he was your age. So there is an entrenched way of doing things. There are regulated monopolies in this industry. There are supply issues. Weather plays a huge role. And so it isn't the easiest, it's not a fluid market. And so you have to know how to navigate through this, and you have to build political consensus. Yep. And that's something that is not the cup of tea of a lot of investors. Yep. They just want, okay, we're going to have a better, cheaper, faster product. We're going to go to market, and we're just going to take over.
But it's not fluid, it's full of friction everywhere.
Yeah. And so we actually like that because you're not going to win every battle, but we're not afraid to engage and to work across the aisle, work with different stakeholders to come to some understanding about letting go of the old way and embracing the new, and realizing that there are all kinds of consequences that you have to account for as a society. And so it isn't just a matter of, this is solar energy, it's now cheap, it's wonderful, so everyone should use it. I mean, there are just so many vested interests and traditions with the existing way we do things. And so I just think that's why it takes longer. But the fact that it's now cheaper, and we need to diversify our supply, and we can't be dependent on, we've learned on certain nations for natural gas. I think everything bodes very well. We just need to invest a whole lot more in it and be smart about any dislocations in society that come from an energy transition, and plan for those as opposed to ignore those impacts.
This is a golden nugget. Now, clearly we have this market uncertainty. Let's call it as positively as we can call it, which probably means that many venture capitalists, VCs and CVCs are going to see some of the portfolio going down in valuation, some going out. We talked about compartmentalizing. That's going to be extremely important in the coming 2 years. Any tips for the audience about the need for it and how to do it better?
So compartmentalizing in the sense of not freaking out about
all the negatives.
Yeah.
Yeah. And still managing to stay the course.
Yeah. Well, so there, in terms of your portfolio construction, that's one level, and one is sort of how to deal with it as a human being, because it's incredibly distressing, really. But as a portfolio construction tool, I mean, there are sectors that didn't get the prices didn't go up so quickly because they're newer, they're more speculative. Things like natural climate solutions, looking at how to prevent wildfires or reforestation. Those are some newer areas, as an example, that haven't been inflated in price. And so put some of, if you can construct a portfolio that isn't as vulnerable to these inflated prices. So that would be one recommendation: is don't just do whatever, what is the popular sector du jour.
Yep.
Look further afield where things are more reasonably
Yep.
priced. In terms of how you deal with a massive downturn in the economy and unrest in the world, it's daunting, and no one has the exact answers. But certainly, when I look at the impact, having lived through several of these cycles, I do think that balancing as an individual, as a human being, your own personal priorities with your work priorities is a key tool that will help you. And by that, compartmentalizing, make sure you don't leave the distress of your work, or leave that there, and make sure that you're able to strengthen your family ties, your ability to kind of nurture your own psychic self at the same time. And in some ways, being a parent during these times, because you have to put so much energy into that, will make you more efficient and will keep you really focused on what's the best use of my time. How can I navigate this without coming undone?
Any tips on how to do it?
I would say that take strength in whatever your community is, and build those bonds. I mean, the whole research that is pretty well known now about how health and aging are really improved when you have a social network.
Yep.
And I don't mean by that online. I mean really connectivity with your family, with human beings that make a difference to you, gives you that strength, and gives you the responsibility really to make sure that you're managing your work in the best possible way, but you're not letting it take over, because in a period of crisis you do wear many hats, and so building that strength from your family, from your community, is going to derive benefits in both your personal and your work life, is at least my experience.
Very nice, thank you. In the last 2 minutes of our interview, I want you to give us reasons to be very optimistic about the future.
Well, we've talked about so many of them,
Yep.
Nicolas. I mean, I think what gets me most optimistic is, in the face of these existential crises that we no doubt are encountering relating to climate, we're seeing record amount of funds invested. And for people like me that have been doing this for a long time, when it was hard to get anyone to invest, I can't tell you how inspiring it is to see that 800, 900 billion, globally invested, whatever those figures are.
Yep.
And it's not all venture capital, obviously, but to see this become a very dynamic investment sector and therefore job creator and business sector is miraculous at a certain level, because it has happened not fast enough to prevent these terrible consequences, but I hope fast enough to make sure that the next generation is able to thrive and enjoy a life that is predicated on preserving our planet as we know it.
Nancy, thank you so much. You've been wonderful and sharing so much candid insight. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Nicolas. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.